Thank you for attending our talk today. Together, we will talk to you about how we created an approach that allowed us to reveal the world's most emotionally intelligent brands through AI-powered mass qual. I am Jemma Toynebee-Smith, and I am the Group Account Director at DVJ Insights.
And I'm Rachel Lever, Global Head of Insights at Dentsu, including Carat. At Carat, we are firm believers that greater human understanding builds better relationships and makes the world a better place. That is true for both people and brands. The better they understand each other, the more value both parties can enjoy from the experiences they share. We call this philosophy and approach designing for people, and it sits at the very centre of our Carat brand, where we focus on building experiences out from a position of empathy. The basis of the work that we're going to show you today has been inspired by Daniel Goldman, the psychologist who brought the term emotional intelligence into the mainstream in 1995 by his best-selling book, Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. His work urged us to see whether we could use it better to understand the quality of the experience that people have with brands, and whether by being more human meant that brands were more successful. In a minute, we'll explain how we translated his approach for brands. However, the picture on this slide here shows him being beamed in from New York into a panel discussion at the Media Festival in Cannes this year, where luckily he fully endorsed our approach. We initially ran the study in 2020 and reran it at the end of last year to see if brand EQ was as important at the tail end of the pandemic. And now, with the cost of living crisis, it's clearly ever more pressing to see whether there are any learnings from the high-performing brands that we can all take on board.
The study in 2020 covered 10 markets and 48 brands. In 2021, we increased that to include 3 more brands across 5 more markets to ensure representation across key geographical markets. The brief was simple. The sample needed to represent the national population in each of those markets, and so we sought 1,000 consumers per market, and that ensured we had plenty of data to deliver against the analysis plan that we had created. Carat had already undertaken an important part of the study, identifying how to reflect the work of Daniel Goldman, who had identified 5 components of EQ: social skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, and empathy. They'd taken those 5 elements and translated them to questions that are far more consumer-friendly and brand-related. So for self-awareness, we have the brand seems to know what it stands for. For self-regulation, we have the brand behaves with honesty and integrity. For motivation, the brand tries hard to deliver a good experience. For empathy, this is the brand understands people like me and what we need. And finally, for social skills, we have this brand always communicates in a clear and meaningful way. Of course, evaluating what people think about each of the brands against these questions is fairly simple. We take the list of brands, we take the list of questions, and we split the sample up across the markets, asking people to tell us on a 5-point scale how they review each brand across each of the questions. Easy. Well, that was exactly the approach that was taken for the previous report, and it gave a great baseline read of what people thought. What do people think about this particular emotion and this particular brand? The results were great and insightful, and Carat were able to produce their first report and provide a really good baseline read, particularly around emotional structures for these brands. But of course, there is always more questions, and there's always a need to understand the why behind the what. There's always the ability to go further. The other challenge that we often face in market research is that there are lots of questions asked across lots of different studies, and often qualitative is classed and handled differently to quantitative. But of course, that's not truly reflective of how humans process their thoughts and emotions. To truly understand what people think, surely it's better to just ask the right question in combination with doing the right analysis at the same time. The problem with market research is that people don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. As David Ogilvy so eloquently puts it, people don't really know what they know. So asking them a list of questions in a forced and overstructured manner means that we're trying to ask people to think in a way that isn't natural. I ask you how many people here have a running list of thoughts every time you step into a shop. I might take that back actually. This is a conference full of market researchers and marketing professionals after all. I expect we might be the exception to the rule. But for the average consumer and the consumer that we want to get a response from, that just isn't what they do. Creating memories every second, experiences every moment, and the brain is squirreling these away and filing them into categories and allocating them against brands and categories in a way that is genuinely astonishing when you truly understand that. What we're not doing is making lists or gathering these thoughts together in an easy to access pocket, ready for when a questionnaire pops into their inbox. And it's that understanding that underpins the approach that we take to market research at DVJ and the approach that we implemented for the evaluation of brand EQ with Carat. So I refer back to those lists that no one keeps in their head, and I ask you, how do people collect those thoughts, feelings and associations? Well, a few weeks ago I was talking to my mum about having some work done to her house, and I asked her to tell me about the team of people who were working there. Now, I could have asked her to just give me a score out of 10, of course, but I didn't. I asked her to tell me about the team, giving her a little bit of guidance and nudging along the way. Now, my mum had already started to tell me about how polite these young men were, how they worked really hard, they were kind, and they even helped her to sort out her new boiler. And asking her to tell me about her experiences and share her story, I was actually given a far bigger network of associations, feelings, thoughts, and crucially emotions about one single scenario that I could simply have had a one-number response for. And that's what we do at DVJ. We utilise storytelling across all that we do, and it's a way to give people the chance to respond in a natural way, and response is key here. Storytelling is a response mechanism that is far more aligned with how we collect our memories and experiences, so it stands to reason that we should get them out of consumers' minds in the way that they got in there. This new thinking and approach meant that we flipped the typical approach in market research on its head. We ask for the story first, and then we ask the structured, aided questions afterwards. And that's what we did for the brand EQ study this year. We asked people to tell us their story, their experience with any one of the 9 categories, their most memorable moment, their most recent, their worst, their best. The point is that the stories that we gathered really were a true reflection of the consumer experience with the category in their own words. And once we have their story, we then go even further with our approach. At this stage, we still haven't asked anyone a list of questions, and yet we went and collected even more organic, unstructured responses. We have a really deep understanding of the category, but our study also needs to understand what underpins the brands and the emotional connection. So we asked for their spontaneous associations with a particular brand. What thoughts, feelings and emotions come to mind, and this is invaluable. We're not checking if someone understands a brand positioning list or messaging strategy. We're understanding what the brand really means to the consumer. Of course, wouldn't it also be great if we could contextualise these words even further? It says here that Marmite has an association with taste. Wow, is that positive or negative? Personally, I hate Marmite, so I know what I'd classify it as, but my job isn't to do that. So how do we get to understand what our consumers mean? Well, we ask them to classify their associations themselves, and that brings a whole new perspective to the thousands of words that we've collected, and it also allows us to analyse them in a quantitative manner. These classifications can be anything, and for this study we use positive, negative, distinctive and relevant. So by this stage we have 15,000 stories. That's 15,000 rich, individual stories from across the globe that tells us all about our consumers' experiences with every major category. We've got almost 1 million associations that describe every major global brand in 15 significant markets, and a spreadsheet of data that would either genuinely excite or frighten you, depending upon what kind of researcher you are. We also have all of the quantitative data that aligns with the previous year's data and approach to navigate and evaluate, and ensure that we're providing Carat with the kind of insight that they're looking for. So, we of course employed AI. Now, AI works by learning. We run large amounts of data with fast iterative processing and algorithms that allows the software to simply learn automatically from patterns and features in the data. It does what a human does, just a whole lot quicker. With the vast number of stories and associations that we had to deal with, AI cut short the processing stage and allowed us to focus on the analysis stage and with robust outcomes. Our AI approach allowed us to establish what trends we saw within the stories by brand, by market, by key age groups and genders. It looked for relationships across all words, all brands, all markets, all age groups. It ran through huge swathes of data in a way that we would never have been able to accomplish as a human, or at least it would have taken us a very, very long time. We used descriptive analytics, looking at what happened and why it happened, so establishing and understanding what people said and how and why that might be, looking for the common denominator across the results. We clustered topics and themes across the stories and were able to identify new and unusual themes and topics by our key groups. Those groups then gave us the direction that we needed to delve deeper. By dividing up the huge data set into workable chunks, we had an immediate starting point for our analysis. And of course, alongside the AI analysis, we also had the actual content of each of those 15,000 stories that gave us rich contextual experiences. To get the best out of those stories by category or market or age group, we used word clouds to analyse all of that data. And of course, with our robust sampling plan, it meant that we could cut the data in every way that we needed to really understand what it was telling us. Crucially, of course, through the classification process, we used coding to help us analyse and evaluate the qualitative associations in a quantitative way, establishing if it was positive, negative, relevant or distinctive. And the whole combination of this meant that we had a world of brand and category knowledge about consumer emotions that allowed Rachel and the team to create the following.
Thank you, Gemma. So what did we do with all of this information? We learned so much from all of this work, and we wanted today to show you some of the highlights from the study. Now, the good news is that there is a significant growth advantage of being emotionally intelligent. Achieving a high EQ makes sound business sense, with brands with high EQ outperforming the market in their stock valuations. Here on the slide, we plotted the increase in shareholder value for our top 20 brand EQ performers versus notable indices like the S&P 500 and the FTSE 100, and found that they overperformed massively. Previously, we calculated the gain in value to be up by 682% from 2010 to 2020. And by extending this to late 2021, it increased to the gain of 910%, boosted by strong performances by brands like Google, Netflix, and McDonald's. What we found in 2020 was that brands that excelled had a strong sense of purpose and were connected to culture. The global pandemic only made this more important. In fact, many of the top performers have acted with confidence and creativity to help their customers adapt to new ways of living. We see numerous examples of this, from Disney's fast rollout of Disney+, keeping people entertained at home with their best content, including brand new movies, to MasterCard's rapid shift to digital to help both shoppers and merchants adapt to new ways of living. So let's look at the rankings, which on this slide go from left to right. Now, one surprising finding in our earliest report was the number of technology brands showing high emotional intelligence. Surprising because the backdrop was a late 2019 storm of news stories that technology was having a dehumanizing effect on our lives. We have seen this strong EQ continue into our new study, with 8 of the top 20 brands being heavily orientated around digital technology and innovation, either as pure tech like Google and Microsoft, or in innovating ways that we buy like PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa. Over the past 2 years, we have seen these brands working hard to become even more human, with both actions like charitable donations by brands including Adidas and H&M, or through changes in their technologies like Google and Amazon improving their voice-operated technology into homes through their smart speakers. And this was one of the key lessons of our work on EQ. The ability to listen, respond, and improve experiences quickly has a strong causal effect on perceptions of brands having the human touch, and show that all brands need a service offering. So let's look at a couple of brands, Apple and Samsung, in more detail. One of the more surprising findings from the original study has been not only confirmed but reinforced in the new report. While Apple is the more valuable company, Samsung is ranked 11 places higher by consumers, with only China and Japan giving Apple a higher EQ score. The pandemic pushed consumption to physical goods rather than experiences, and since Samsung and Apple are the world's two makers of smartphones, both prospered. Samsung gained in its range, both in the variety of price points for its products and the variety of its branded products. The right of this slide shows each of the brand's components of EQ, with Apple in light blue and Samsung in the slightly darker blue at the bottom, where, as you can see, Samsung outperforms across the board. Samsung's biggest year-on-year gains came in self-regulation. This brand behaves in honesty and integrity, up to second in our ranking of this measure from 8th in the last year's study. While its overall score was motivation, tries to deliver a good experience at 79%. The positivity around Samsung can be further demonstrated by the three associations in the word clouds on the left, where people mentioned reliability, quality and technology more so than Apple. One factor for Apple not performing as strongly relatively seems to be the growing suspicion of big tech in Europe, particularly in Germany, France and the UK, where Apple was scored lower on honesty and integrity than in many other markets. Let's now look at the results in a different way across the generations. To some, the marketing industry may seem obsessed by younger consumers as a target audience, and our study continues to show the importance of younger consumers beyond simply their spending power, as they are often early adopters and advocates for the biggest businesses of tomorrow. It is clear from our analysis of the different age cohorts that many of the younger companies in our study, for example Netflix and Uber, scored higher among younger people. Younger people's expectations of brands' behaviour and the experience they offer is different. They equate convenience and flexibility with humanity more strongly than their older siblings and parents. Some brands scored less well with the younger age group, including Kellogg's, Panasonic and Philips, meaning that these brands may have to do some work to address their future customers. We found brands often outside the top 10 have particular resonance for one or two audiences, and as you can see from the slide, we named them generation brands. The analysis actually raises questions about the ways the brands outside Gen Z's routine can build emotional resonance with them. When we looked at how the rankings differed from one generation to the overall sample, we found that the younger group favoured some brands more than the other age groups. For example, Tesla ranked 43rd overall, but 29th for the Gen Z audience. This means that the younger group ranked at 14 points above the average, the strongest individual generational skew within our data. This builds on our findings that Tesla is a polarising brand with a considerable disparity in its scoring between men, mainly positive, and women, mainly negative. A core element of our most recent study was the exploration of what different categories and brands mean to people as a foundation for the development of richer emotional connections. If you remember, our approach featured the writing of 15,000 unrestricted stories about category experiences, which we analysed through an AI technique, allowing us to find commonalities in people's narratives. We've chosen automotive here as an example which elicits very strong emotions, mainly positive, in people, over 80% of them in fact. The stories that people shared have a big focus on togetherness as a theme, with this togetherness being tilted more towards family rather than friends. Drilling down, we found different stories and associations by generations and gender. For example, we see in the automotive category, the main associations clearly move from speed to comfort as people get older. Equally revealing through the subordinate associations, Gen Z associate cars with being expensive, millennials with convenience, and the over 35s with freedom. Now, the stories expanded on what people meant by freedom and showed that it was mainly women that had this association, allowing them to leave their everyday dramas behind for a while. This freedom was also associated a lot with music. So clearly, automotive manufacturers need to tailor quite specific experiences to be more emotionally in tune with each cohort, and this gives them a lot of intel to work with.
So, what should we take away from all of this? Well, the quantitative measures by themselves actually give us plenty of insights. But as you saw from the automotive example, The additional insight that we got from stories and free associations gave us so much more depth. Context really is king. From a practical point of view, humans can't do everything, or they can't do everything that we did in a cost or time efficient manner. AI cuts out the labour and allows us as practitioners to analyse the data that really counts. Emotion is the glue. We know that brands need to display emotion to grow, and this can also be seen in the way that consumers describe their emotions spontaneously throughout the stories and the category associations. And finally, there is always room to improve, of course. So for us, it's about taking a step back and just checking if there are any new techniques that could help us get to a better answer. We thank you for your attention and we would welcome any questions.